Fantastic, thank you. Good morning and welcome to today's session on communicating ESG commitments in the post-COVID-19 era. My name is Jennifer Kadisa. I'm a regional director at Hill & Knowlton Strategies, and I have the honor of hosting three distinguished professionals to talk about a topic that has been dominating the headlines. Even before the pandemic, the consideration of ESG factors by organizations across the globe and across all sectors had been gaining momentum. Then COVID-19 struck, and instead of fading, the ESG factors really swept around the world like a hurricane, with some businesses more prepared to face it than others. We're here today to explore what that means for the communications industry in the region. On that note, I would like to introduce you to your panelists. Libby Henniger joins us from Mubadala Investment Company in Abu Dhabi, where she is corporate narrative lead and in charge of Mubadala's communications on ESG and responsive investment. Alex Malouf is Corporate Communications Director, Middle East and Africa at Schneider Electric, and will shed light on the unique challenges of ESG communications in the technology sector. And last but not least, Davide Del Deo is Advisor for Sustainability and Social Investment at ESG consultancy Sustainable Square here in the UAE, where he guides businesses on their reporting journey. Before we go into the discussion, I would like to encourage the audience to submit their questions. We will have about 10 minutes towards the end of the session to cover them. Sounds good? Great, so let's kick it off with the first question. As we have just established, the idea of a green recovery and ESG has been dominating headlines. So what really is the imperative for communications professionals in the region? Alex, in how far have priorities in communications shifted at Schneider Electric? Do you want to go first?
This is an interesting question because I actually don't think we are prioritizing a green recovery in the Middle East and North Africa. If you look at the European Union, everybody's talking about green recovery. Everybody's talking about retrofitting, rebuilding better, reducing carbon emissions. The same in the US with the new administration, which I'm very, very relieved about. I'm going to get political now and say it openly. Same as well in other countries like South Korea. Here, we have not seen discussions about green recovery. We've seen at the Gulf talk about renewables, which is great from a governmental perspective. But what we're really missing here is getting the private sector and also as well the public involved. And that really has to change. And this is what we've got to advocate for as organizations. We've got to really push hard on getting governments to realize that we are part of the solution. We can help them hit their 2030 targets, their COP targets. We can help them in terms of making the region greener, and also as well, we can help them in reshaping economy, so we get more youth into employment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Very interesting perspective. Libby, from your stance at Mubadala Investment Company, is that something you would support, or do you see it completely differently?
I think that this is some very, very interesting points, but I believe there's four key factors that no communications professionals can ignore towards the green recovery and the implications that this poses for business. I think there's an element of government and regulatory in the Middle East. I think has realized that oil and gas has a shelf life, both from an economic and environmental perspective, but especially in this region, it's one that's set to be most impacted by things like climate change. We're seeing across the region governments actively diversifying their economies away from fossil fuels. Things like UAE Vision 2021, Abu Dhabi Vision 2030, the second UAE UN nationally determined contribution, and things like Abu Dhabi Sustainable Finance Declaration and other such initiatives. Companies in the regions are expected to work in partnerships with governments to progress these initiatives. So I think to that point, there is a requirement for us to be active participants and active partners. I think also if you look at things like sustainability performance, that's a way to attract international investment. While things like the ESG bond market is still relatively nascent compared to other regions such as China, Europe, North America. There's still some very encouraging signs and examples, things like Majid Al Futtaim's Green Sukun in 2019. I think there's an opportunity for private sector and institutions to help support things like improving on ESG disclosures, proactive engagements with ESG rating agencies, and then integrating ESG throughout businesses to actually help drive international and active passive fund flows. All the while, I think, this is part of supporting businesses when they're thinking about exiting or selling assets then into other markets. The third point I would make is just things on emerging international best practice. So for Mubadala, ESG reporting and communications around environmental sustainability are consistent with the key principles of One Planet of Sovereign Wealth Funds working group. And I think, you've got prestigious, influential sovereign wealth funds, asset managers, and private equity funds all working together to address things like climate change and other issues through consultation, business strategy planning, risk management, and public reporting.
Davide, I'd like to hear from you. From your experience as an advisor, are companies prioritizing ESG enough, particularly in communications and reporting?
Good morning, Jennifer. And I would like to thank you, Alex, to start this conversation in a provocative way, because he straightforward put the highlight on the fact that in the region there is probably a lack of focus on the E of the ESG. So what I can tell is that from my experience with different industries across the region, I always push to the shift from the CSR to the new terminology of sustainability. So that's when we want to move from strictly related to social responsibility of every corporate and every industry into a more broader overview of the sustainability of the company. So starting accounting also for environmental and governance issue when it comes to also social. So yes, for sure, answering the provocative message, there is a lack of understanding also of the environmental topic, and coming from a previous experience in Europe, in a country like Sweden, where everything is about environmental, the social issues, let's say, are almost solved, I would say. There is a need to clarify and push more on the social issue for sure in the region, but still opening doors to environmental topic like climate change, like water management in the region is mostly the most important topic, and we need to pressure on it. We need the corporate to report on it and find solution and help all the community for future reference. We need to pressure on it also for future generation. And I mean, it's a new journey, I would say. Lots of companies are already stepping in. We'll see the energy sector is probably one of the first one in the region to start pushing for it. There is probably a bit of gap between the communication and the actual work, but it's a job that is working together, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So what I'm hearing here is that there is a clear need to advance ESG communications in the region. What I would like to ask you, is it not actually the task and the clear requirement for communications professionals to advance these discussions? Because communications professionals are the ones with the ear on the market. They should be the ones talking to stakeholders. So what's your perspective on that, Libby?
Unmute. I think, when you think about the responsibility on communications professionals, we play a very important role in weaving, ESG integrations into business operations. Instead of it just being viewed as an exercise in public relations, it's really important in order for us to have a very strong ESG impact. The only way to do this is to reduce the long-term risks associated with, ESG issues, but also then avoiding accusations of greenwashing.
Okay. So let's dig a little bit deeper here. When you really think about the integration of ESG factors into the business model, what are the contributions communications professionals can make? Does anyone have an opinion on that? Davide, perhaps from your experience as an advisor?
But I'm currently facing, like, if we go back to the I would say post-COVID or hopefully latest part of the COVID pandemic. We see an important participation of the communication team, probably the most important one when it comes to report on sustainability, to report on, in this case, the COVID situation. But this is a journey that has begun like later, much before, in which the communication department of corporates were always the one, let's say, more interested in helping sustainability advisor or the CSR department to create the narrative. And I think that's the most important part that the communication department can play and has to play when it comes to sustainability. So going out there, and we know today the power of also of social media, and create content related to sustainability that goes out and gets into the laptop or PC of every young generation to create that brand that can be long lasting in the value.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Alex, if you think about it as a scale of 1 to 10, 1 would be to only do ESG reporting. So that's the only thing a communications professional would be in charge of. And the other extreme would be to really advance and drive forward the integration of ESG factors into the business model. Where do you think Schneider Electric stands, and where does the wider industry stand at this point?
Look, I'm pretty lucky. I work for a company whose business model is built around decarbonizing our clients. You know, so it's fundamental to what we do. And that's one of the reasons why I left one company which does very well on sustainability, P&G, to go to one which does, for me, even better work, more fundamental work. My argument is really simple. Being a sustainable company is good for business. It means that you have much more in the way of potential for business. You've got a longer term business. And it's been recognized by forward-thinking organizations in the region. I know Libby's here, and I'm going to call out Mubadala in terms of the work that they do. They have Masdar, they have other projects which are ongoing. And you know, they've seen it from a number of years back. They've seen the opportunities that there are in terms of doing business in a sustainable fashion in the space of sustainability. And we need to bring the rest of the industry with us. You know, even when you look at, I think, a wider awareness of SDGs. You know, for me, the key SDG is number 17, which is all about partnerships. So we've got to help. We've got to help boards. We've got to help people who manage companies realize what sustainability can do for them. For example, it's actually not a cost. It can be a driver of growth. It can be a driver of revenues. And we've also got to then point to something else, which I know we haven't touched on yet, which is there is also S and there is G, which we don't often talk about in the region. It's very much in the region, it's very much the E which gets discussed. We don't look at the S and the G as much as in other markets around the world.
Davide, I see you frowning. Is that something you would support?
I mean, I'm not really familiar with the narrative of Schneider, but I've seen more of a focus on social, if I have to tell the truth, Alex, in the region, or at least for also government entities. And I see a lot of influence on community support, a lot of diversity and inclusion that is growing luckily in the region. There is a conversation going on that side. So I always, and also if I look at what I like to call the community support chapter of the sustainability report that I helped creating, there is a lot of narrative in the support of community group, NPO, and similar entities. When it comes to the environmental, it's always like more of a struggle collecting the data from the department, trying to understand where are they in their journey. And I mean, we're not speaking here on a company that have been reported for like 10 years, but the one that are starting the journey, I can see that there is like a legacy of social coming from like 5, 10, 20 years, depending on how long the company has been in the market. But when it comes to environment, it's always a new topic. And I mean, it's challenging from an advisory perspective and with a love for the environment, if I can describe it that way, to speak with people that have been in the traditional business for so many years and trying to explain the value behind what you mentioned before, the value behind being environmentally responsible and on the long term, which can be the financial return. Because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we are able, also from a communication perspective, to explain the relation between the financial and the ESG. So whenever in the region, someone will be able to understand the financial return, the value behind being responsible from a social, from a governance, and from an environmental perspective, we're done. We're out of business, I would say.
Mm-hmm. All right, so this has come up several times already. I'd like to go into reporting next and really take a deeper look at that. Considering the lack of globally acknowledged ESG reporting standards and the fact that new approaches are mushrooming really all the time, we have something almost every week where a new reporting standard is coming out. What does that mean for communications professionals? So how do you actually navigate that? I'd like to hear from our practitioners first. So Libby, perhaps you can talk to us about sustainability ESG reporting at Mubadala. How do you do it?
So I think one of the most important things when it comes to reporting is really establishing, within your own organizations, what's the framework you're going to use. And I think it's important to highlight that every business, every entity is different. It will have materiality factors that are most important to them. And that's what organizations really need to start focusing in on. So at Mubadala, we have used a combination of, different reporting standards to actually identify what are the most material risks and issues to our business. And obviously, as a global and responsible investment company, these are quite, wide-reaching. And then you've got to funnel that down and look at it through the perspective of, your different sectors, your different geographies, because each of those will be very different. So, again, just to call out some, for our organization, we have, taken elements from SASB, from GRI, from UNPRI, TCFD, and it really is about tailoring these standards in order to be able to address the material issues for your own entity.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So that actually brings me to the question, if it's pick and choose, Alex, does it mean you only report on the E in ESG?
We can't. We're a listed company, we're global, and we've got to report on everything. We report, we use different frames, but our fundamental reporting is based on the SDGs, what we do in terms of our SDG impact, and that's what we always come back to, and that's what I said to everybody. Pretty much all the most reliable and most trusted frameworks are based on the SDGs. They are comprehensive. They are not comprehensive. They are brilliant in the way that they've been done. And whoever did them, one day I'll find out and I'll go to them and shake their hand, because they categorize everything that we need to look at in terms of an organization. And I'm sure they also help Davide and the team at Sustainable Square as well, just because, again, they give you everything that you need to look at in terms of an organization as well, in terms of communication, and also in terms of reporting. So SDGs every single time.
Okay, great. A lot of deep insights from all of you. But what I would like to do is think about today's session from the perspective of the audience. So, assuming we're talking to communications professionals, why should people really care about ESG when we have just established that it's early days, it's not as important yet? What should people do today to get on top of the ESG game? Davide, do you have any insights? Or Libby? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's really important for communicators to work with their asset managers, management teams, boards, to really understand, the long-term impacts of ESG considerations to the business, because ultimately these are going to be the decision makers that are either implementing frameworks or policies. And then, our role as communicators is to help them to understand both the risks and opportunities. Mm-hmm. I think as well, I'd like to just maybe come back to a point that David made earlier, which was around being able to, help businesses tell a narrative around ESG. which I completely agree. And I think it's great to have that element of storytelling to really help your audiences and your stakeholders to understand your organization's position. But that absolutely has to be backed up with data and action.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Any other perspectives on that?
I had a point written down before this meeting, and it's something that I've seen working from a communication perspective. That is having an approach of a quarterly based small reporting. So we always wait for the sustainability annual report or having that discussion. Instead, with the social media and with the power they today have to also to enhance the brand, if we want to stay on the communication and the marketing side, having a quarterly or even a monthly update saying, okay, we're doing these small improvements to achieve our long-term strategy from carbon net zero mission, if I want to speak about the best option out there. But like quarterly saying, okay, we did this, we're creating some solar panel, or we're shifting to wind. Any little thing, but being communicated like in a temporary manner.
Mm-hmm. Libby, I'd like to come back to something that you just said, which was around storytelling in ESG. What really is the difference? When does storytelling become greenwashing? Can you talk to us about that a little?
Well, I think that's in the to the point I just previously made, in the absence of data and not being able to back up the story that you're telling with actual factual metrics to show the measurement, to show how, you know, across either environmental, social, or governance issues and considerations that, you know, your organization is actually moving the needle. Again, I think a key factor in this is acknowledging that it is a journey and every organization's start point on that journey will be different, but you have to be able to back up your story with data and then show the actions that you're taking in order to make continual improvement. And I think at that point, then it can't be doubted that the actions are genuine and coming from the right place.
Thank you so much. I'd like to come back very quickly to, you know, having that ear on the market as a communications professional. So really understanding what stakeholders actually need. ESG is all about them. ESG is about the world that we live in. It's about the stakeholders. So what do you do? What do communications professionals in the region do to understand their stakeholders better? Is there any, you know, engagement, communication? What is your solution to that?
That's a really good question, Jennifer, because if you look at the Gulf, if you let's sort of separate societies out. If you look at somewhere like Levant, Egypt, there's a strong civil society, and there's a lot of NGOs who are independent. There's a lot more discussion around issues publicly. In the Gulf, it's really fair to say you don't see as much independence. Even, for example, to actually form an NGO is a very complex process in the Gulf. So you've got to be a very, very good listener in terms of understanding what is happening with sentiment within the population or within populations, because again, populations are not monolithic. I also find that it's really interesting to engage with other organizations in the private sector to learn what they're doing, and to give Davide's organization credit, Sustainable Square, his GM, his founding partner Monatim, has been instrumental in doing some of this work. But I think also the one other area which we've got to do a better job at is working and talking with government. It's got better in the past couple of years, but there are still too many barriers in terms of understanding what each part of this ecosystem is doing. You know, if we know, for example, what we can do to better support governments, then we'll be able to step up and give them the support that they need to achieve their ESG goals. And we all have ESG goals. Governments as well have ESG goals. So I think that's one area that I would really like to focus on, because it's something we really want to do much more on, but we cannot, no one part of the equation can achieve this by themselves.
Davide, in your conversations with clients and prospective clients, what is your feeling? What can companies do when they're at the very beginning of their ESG journey? How can they kind of get on top of it right now? So what's the first step?
Not aim for the 10 point. That's what I always say. So if we have a scale from 1 to 10, I'm trying to simplify the conversation. One company is on a first year reporting or first year of strategy implementation. We don't want to make too big promise and then they go like silent in the department and nobody wants to have more KPIs from an ESG perspective on top of the financial one and feel like pressure by it. So what I always try to do with every department of every stakeholder that I engage with in the company is to do baby step, I would say. Okay, also because of the lack of understanding in the region that we were discussing before. So it's starting saying, okay, let's start having this data. Those are simple, basic data that we need to create a report. And those are the ones that should enter in your daily, quarterly, monthly way of reporting. So the second year, when we come in place, if we come in place as an advisor and they're not ready already to work on their own, as sometimes happen, they have already an understanding of what this disclosure means, what an energy management, energy consumption is, what water management, what we want to know from a management approach towards the water management is. So we always see second, third year that is already the department or the person appointed in the department for the ESG disclosure that is like coming to us with a smile saying, okay, we did this year, we have implemented this. So I believe this is really important to not strike to looking at European company or US company and say, okay, no, we want to be benchmarked with them, but let's start basic and then 2-3 years down the line, we can reassess and see where we are compared to other company in other regions. But I feel the conversation should be more regionalized at the moment and see also which are the pressing challenges for the region. And I go back to the diversity and inclusion topic that we were discussing before.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. I cannot see audience questions at this point. It might be a technical flaw. We have a couple of minutes left, so I think one last question from my side for now. If I could ask you for your predictions, please, on the state of ESG communications in about 5 years, so 5 years down the line in 2026, where do you think we will be, given that many companies, organizations are just embarking on the journey? Libby, do you want to share your thoughts first?
Sure, thank you. And I think that's a great question. I think the one thing that we need to be mindful is just how quickly the ESG landscape is evolving. And I think as communicators, we have a duty to ensure that we are keeping up with that evolution in order to be able to best advise our organizations. It's here for good. It's not something that's going to go away. And if anything, I see it becoming more critical and imperative to the way organizations do business, particularly from the perspective of talent retention. You know, in this region, the UAE in particular, it's a very young, dynamic country. If you, as organizations, want to attract top talent, you have to make ESG considerations a critical part of how you do business.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. We actually have an audience question, so let's swing over to that one quickly. The question is around, do the panelists think that we need more regulatory frameworks to enhance ESG reporting and overall compliance? So that would be, for example, a local version of the FTSE for Good ranking. Alex, what's your take on that?
Definitely not. We've already got all the frameworks we need. We have the frameworks. It's not an issue of frameworks. It's an issue of actually getting out and doing the work. For example, you know, if you're registered in the Dubai stock market, you have to do ESG reporting. Saudi Tadawul is also pushing companies as well to do much more reporting. So we don't need more frameworks, especially we don't need more local frameworks, because as I said, we shouldn't be even looking at the issue from a local perspective. It's a global issue. We've got to be reporting based on global benchmarks. We've got to be using those to see how we're doing compared with other places and other organizations in the world. So yeah, let's move away from that framework discussion. Let's just get on to actually doing the proper work. And also as well, educating our stakeholders, both internally and also externally.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. that brings us to the end of today's session. To conclude, I think we have learned 3 key things. So one is really on the urgency to act. Libby, you've said ESG is not going anywhere, so we get a bit on top of it now. Second, the integration of ESG factors into the business, I believe, really needs that feedback loop from communication, so that's absolutely crucial. And third, there is no one-size-fits-all approach, but maybe we do not need more regulations. We just need to be more proactive and really push the agenda forward when it comes to ESG reporting and communications. Thank you to Provoke for bringing us together today, and thank you to our fantastic panelists for sharing their experience and insights.
Thank you, Jennifer, so much. And thank you to the whole panel, Jennifer, David, Libby and Alex, for a really frank discussion on the challenges and opportunities of prioritising all 3 bits of ESG. So thank you very much, guys, for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.